Welcome to another video tutorial on strategies, tactics, and technique tips for the week for martial arts. I'm Rich Alton, and today's video tutorial is going to cover an interesting topic and a very popular topic, and that topic is titled, what is the difference between striking for the street and striking for MMA? In other words, what are the specific factors that are different that go into applying techniques for the street and techniques for MMA? Well, I'm here to tell you that there is a major difference between the two when it comes to striking for the street or for self-defense or for your personal protection, basically for survival-based reasons, as opposed to MMA for sport combat, for endurance, for winning, for scoring points, things of those nature. So stay tuned in here and let's get into it and talk about the primary factors that play a role in developing a striking arsenal that is specifically designed for the street and specifically designed for MMA. Okay, when it comes to defining the difference between how to strike for the street and how to strike for MMA, there are three primary factors that I'm going to share with you today in this video that will define the difference between the two. Yes, there are more factors, but for today's video tutorial, I'm going to share three primary factors, and within those factors, there's a lot of specifics that is the difference between somebody who practices realistic striking for the street and realistic striking for MMA. Okay, so there are three primary factors that play a role in developing effective striking, or how somebody should strike in the street if they want to be effective and striking for MMA purposes. And the first factor comes down to psychological. All right, the psychological approach and the psychological training that goes into MMA striking is different than it is for the street. For example, in MMA, most fighters are concerned about, do they have the endurance? They psychologically have the endurance to keep striking, to keep moving, to stay busy in here, and to finish the round that they're fighting in here. If I'm going a 5-minute round in here, do I have the endurance to be effective within that time period? Okay. As opposed to in the street, the psychological factor is how do I survive this scenario? In other words, in the street, you have to be concerned about your life, about your safety, about the safety of other people you care about. So in the street, you must have a striking arsenal that is going to be effective. It must be effective, in the first strike. You must be effective. I cannot stress that enough. That if you are not effective in the first, 2 seconds of a street altercation here, your life could be over like that. As opposed to in MMA, all right, I don't have to be effective in the first strike. I don't have to be effective in 100 strikes. I have to be effective overall as a kind of a overall nutritional based look at it. So I don't have to be I don't have to throw the perfect punch and cause damage, even though that's maybe what a fighter's trying to do. But what they have to do is to throw enough strike in here to get the audience and the judges to look like that I am taking action and they are not stopping it. Okay. Psychological approach is a huge section when it comes to both in MMA and the street. But in the street, your mindset has to be willing to maximize resistance in here and be willing to stop and survive anything in all arenas in all encounters that you may find yourself in most realistic real world encounters, and that depends on kind of the lifestyle that you live in. Okay, so in the street, the psychological approach means is that I need to survive. The end result is I need to survive and walk away alive with the minimum amount of damage as possible. All right, I have to be effective, immediately. Okay, I have to make sure that I'm my perception of what's happening or what I think's happening in the street or what may happen in here is somewhat accurate here. It means I need to perceive correctly in here like this. I have to be able to see exactly what to do in a blink of an eye in here, because I don't have time the time I do when I have in rounds in here. Okay, So in MMA, because you're dealing with rules, refs, rings, and rounds, okay, that it puts a safety factor on, what I can and, can do, and what I know my opponent, can and cannot do to me to some degree. Okay, I know in the street or in MMA that my opponent's not going to run his fingers into my eyes. He's not going to bite me. He's not going to grab my hair and try to punch me. He's not going to pull out a weapon that he had hidden somewhere. We're fighting on the mats in here like this, right? So if I fall down in here, throwing a punch in here like this, I know I'm not going to shatter my knee, as opposed to the street. If I pick a technique in here that's maybe very complex in nature, but it's popular in MMA. Let's say I throw an overhand haymaker in here because that's my favorite technique that I practice in MMA, or that's what I learned in my Mauy Thai classes in here. And I missed the guy in here like this, and I fall down. I hit my knee on 120-degree asphalt in the street in here, right? That's psychologically going to mess me up as well as physically mess me up. Okay, so you have to take into account your approach when it comes to applying your striking techniques, and why you're doing it and how you're doing it. So that's the first factor, is psychological approach is one of the differences in striking for the street and striking for MMA. Let's go on to the second approach. Okay, so I just went through the first factor that plays a role in the difference between striking for the street and striking for MMA, okay, which was psychological approach. The second factor that plays a role in defining the difference between striking for the street and striking for MMA is practicality, okay? Practicality means that the techniques that someone practices for MMA, okay, may not be completely realistic in delivery and effect than it would be, in the street. For example, in MMA, right, a lot of fighters who study Muay Thai kickboxing here are standing up here in a stance like this, right, always practicing from some kind of a ready position, okay, and then they're practicing a roundhouse kick in here like this, right, or a switch kick coming up in here, right, or they're practicing an overhand right or something like that, right. Those techniques, even though they may be popular and somewhat effective to the crowd in MMA, may not be very realistic and practical when delivering it, trying to do that in the street. For example, the stance, all right? The stances that you apply in MMA are always from a ready position, okay? And you're always at a safe distance when you start, right? You're standing on the other side of the ring in here like this, and there's at least 20-something feet in here, and both fighters are agreed to, to try to keep, size each other up and strategize, how to pick each other apart in here like this, okay? In the street, okay, most street situations don't occur standing in a ready stance. Most street positions occur where we're standing this close to each other in here, like very close proximity, and usually people are not in a physical position of readiness. Their hands are down, their feet are flat-footed like this, they're leaning, they can be turned to the side in here, and it could be a surprise kind of altercation in here like this, right? And so they're not in a physical position here to get into a functional fighting platform, right? So in the street, the stances that are different for the street that should be trained primarily should be stances that are more reaction training or reaction ready based, confrontation management based. In other words, a lot of stances in the street are going to put you into a somewhat of a ready position, a neutral position here, where your hands are hopefully up into a confrontation position where you can take action in here in one-step motion in here. With my hands up in here like this, right? I can immediately get into action here immediately like this, right? Or my hands are somewhat down in here because this happens to be the most natural position that a human being stands in when it's walking or talking in here, standing upright, right? And it's a transition position in here to go into an action. So if my hands are down like this, even though this is very dangerous, all right, a lot of striking for the street should be practiced from down here as well as up here, because for a moment, I'm standing here like this, right, and someone confronts me and I have to turn in here, and all of a sudden they throw a technique out of nowhere here like this, and I have to react, and get into an action like this. I didn't have time to get into my kickboxing position in here and back up and say, well, hold on a second here, let's try to feel each other out. So a lot of stances that are basically based on the element of surprise, okay, based on positional striking in here. So what happens when I'm standing here like this, right, and someone, confronts me over here, and I don't have time to turn and square off in here like this, Okay? So in MMA, they don't have to deal with stances like, positions like this, unless they get out of position for a second and they got to transition into position. So in the street, you have to practice from stances that are going to be based on realistic and most probable scenarios, right? Level changing in here. I could be down on one knee for whatever reason, laying on my back in here, right? Two people confront me in here like this. I can't just stand here and practice the techniques always from a ready position all the time and expect that to always be the scenario in the street. I have to practice techniques that are, one-step action based, where my hands are relatively up and I'm relatively neutral in here, right? Trying to manage the confrontation through my verbal and psychological skills. And I also have to practice techniques where I'm quite not ready with my hands, somewhere down in here like this, where I have to learn how to get into a position here very quickly and deliver a technique from surprise. Okay? So the techniques themselves, practicality, practicality techniques are things that you can use almost all the time. Things that are directly wired to your nervous system that allow you to use in most situations. And practical techniques are probably going to be your hands the most, your hands, your fingers, your fists, your elbows in here, as opposed to MMA, even though they punch and, and use their elbows and stuff, things like that, right? Certain techniques in MMA, like kicking somebody in the muscular structure in the leg, is probably not a practical technique to use in the street if you're thinking about causing damage and getting the hell out of there, right? A lot of limitations with that. You may not have the physical athleticism to do that. You may not have the right environment to do that. You're not going to be able to do that standing in an elevator, standing in a phone booth or something like that, and try to do a spinning wheel kick to somebody in here, okay? So practicality of techniques and technique selection is the second factor that defines the difference between striking for the street and striking for MMA. Let's go on to the third factor. Okay, so I just discussed the second factor that defines the difference between striking for the street and striking for MMA. The third factor has to do with technical application, or the method of delivery in which you're going to practice your techniques from. So assuming you have a practical understanding of techniques that are most likely to be the most effective and the most useful for most genders and and communities for the street, now we have to talk about the technical application of it. So this part here can get there can be a lot of controversy between this in here, but it comes down to the environment that you're functioning in and the positions that you're finding yourself in, right? So the technical application, the method of delivery for the street has to be, again, it has to be effective. You have to be effective in the first action, okay? You have to cause damage and stun and disrupt a person's biocomputer here, right? Their ability to see, breathe, and think, right in here like this, okay? So all your techniques need to be effective immediately, okay? The other technical aspect of this in here is the ability to function from both sides of the body in here in a split second here. All right. So what that means in here like this is that sometimes I'm not going to be able to always get into a position of readiness and then prefer one side over the other in here. Right? If that happens, that's a best case scenario. But for the street, your striking has to psychologically and technically be designed for worst case scenario situations and whatever that could be. As opposed to in MMA, because there's more time frame in between actions in here because of rounds and endurance and things like that, I can prefer to stand one way as opposed to the other because I have a favorite in here. In the street, that's not always going to be applicable, so you have to be able to practice from both sides of the body. Now, when it comes to the actual delivery, the method of delivery in here for striking for the street, all right, the physics and the biomechanics have to be addressed and stressed a lot more. Okay, so for example, most fighters who train in Mauy Thai and boxing in here like this for combat sports in here are going to hold their hands in positions in here that protect their face in here and kind of guard their body. So a traditional boxing position where their hands are curled in like this, or their hands are up in here and their elbows are tucked in here like this, and they're literally trying to snap from their elbow. If you look at it from this angle, they're trying to snap their elbow and keep their elbow down and protect their body. Right? And the reason why, one of the advantages of doing that in here is, again, I can protect kind of a big area of my body in here. But the problem with doing that in here is that that's only going to work at range or at long range. Okay, so in MMA, everybody's always trying to keep their range, right? So they get into exchange in here, and they get into a grappling situation, and they separate in here, or even just like in boxing, and they're standing out here. So they're always trying to hit at the optimal apex of the strike, all right? In the street, you're not going to be able to do that all the time. So what happens in the street, right? Like I said earlier, most situations occur in very close proximity, okay, touching distance, where I'm not going to be able to get my distance in here. So if I'm trying to adopt a guard position in here like boxing or Muay Thai and thinking that I'm going to deliver a lot of power from here like this, it's not going to happen, okay, quite as easily, because the skeletal muscular structure is not put in the best lines of force or the best power lines in here from the point of conception. Therefore, it's not going to be able to take an effective vector to the target. All right, so you have to change the mechanics on the techniques themselves if you're going to be effective for the street as opposed to effective for the MMA. All right. What that means is that you have to be able to, if we're going back to a guard stance in here, I have to have my hands, arms in a position of readiness in here that allow me to access both offense and defense from both sides of my body in here and be able to hit with any technique, right, either from our right or left side. So if I punch from this side in here, I should be able to have the same punch from this side. Okay? So the mechanics that you are going to apply into your striking, into your punching techniques in here and your kicking techniques need to be changed, based on the position. Okay? So if I'm standing here like this in here, right, for me to throw a left jab in here and I try to do something like a boxing type jab in here, this is not going to be effective whatsoever. I'm going to have to turn, and square my body up for a moment in here and get into a position when I deliver the technique in here, right, like this, right, that I have a driving hard punch, right, that's going to repel or cause damage, right, in the first action. Remember, it's got to be effective immediately. Okay? So let's go ahead now and talk about a little more about the mechanics and some of the science that goes into some of the positional striking that you're going to be in the street, as well as that you would not be in MMA, okay? As well as why train like this for the street, and how, why, not to train like that for MMA. Okay, let's get into that. Okay, continuing talking about the technical application of striking techniques and delivering them in the street and delivering them in MMA. What I want to talk about now is I want to talk about the hand positions or positions of the body in here that need to be stressed more for the street, differently than they need to be stressed for MMA. Okay, so I talked about having your hands up in here like this, right, and having your hands more in a natural position in here. So a natural hand hanging position would mean your arms are hanging naturally at your side like this. Your arms aren't like this. Your arms aren't like this. Your arms aren't like this. Okay, so for striking for the street, because you have to be able to be effective with both linear and circular strikes, as well as striking for MMA, you want to have access to any technique in here. So you have to have a position of neutrality, meaning that I want to be able to pull any weapon out, as I need it at that time to solve my problem. I don't want to rely on a specific move. Okay, like in MMA, I might stand here and I may turn sideways like this because I'm relying on my left cross in here, or my left straight right in here like this. When in the street, that may not be the most appropriate position to adopt, because you don't know if you need that or not, right? There are some liabilities by doing that, by planing your body off, by trying to hit from the rear side always first, things of those nature, right? So your hand position in here, a natural hand position in here, would mean I bring my arms up in here, my arms, come up right off my sides like this, and my palms relatively open in here, right? So from this angle, it will look something like this. Now, as far as, standing, whatever, stance you want to stand in or end up in for the street, sometimes you can set that up, sometimes you're not able to do that, as opposed to MMA you can. So a hand position in here is really important. I want to be able to protect my vital targets, right? My vision, my thinking, right, and my respiratory, all kind of right here, a biocomputer. My hands in here in position have to be in such a way in here where I can deliver very close, short, powerful strikes in here, particularly straight punches in here like this. okay? I need to be able to hit with circular strikes in here and very close and non-telegraphic blows. I have to cause damage in the first action here when it comes to the street. Now, obviously in MMA, you're never standing this close, standing here in kind of a confrontation position, but you are grappling and fighting in close range in the street in here like this. But the difference again lies in the psychology. If I'm standing this close in the street here, I'm thinking I'm going to end this thing in one shot in here, hopefully, and get the heck out of here like this. As opposed to this, MMA, I may want to be here on purpose because I'm trying to drive a guy into the cage and I'm trying to institute my grappling and take him down, or clinch fight him and stuff, things of that nature. So I have to have hand positions that are designed specifically for the street, that are going to allow me to access the most weapons, immediately here with minimal amount of limitations, as opposed to the MMA. Some fighters in here got their hands up like this in some strange position in here, and it kind of minimizes kind of what they cannot do. They have more telegraphic actions, right? Swatting type punches in here. Their arms are down like this. They're standing sideways in here, right? Whatever the case may be. And what happens is that because they're doing that, they're kind of not in a neutral position, and it only kind of allows them to access certain techniques with maximum effect, and kind of also makes them telegraph certain actions in here. Okay? So having your hands in more of a neutral position where you can access offense and defense in here, right? Both high gate and mid gate in here like this, right? And obviously dealing with my flanks are incredibly important in the street in here, all right? And also they're important in MMA, okay? But not as important in MMA because you're only dealing with an adversary one-on-one, okay? So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more here about the technical application for strikes delivering in the street and strikes delivering in MMA. Okay, so I just discussed the hand position. That is a factor that defines the difference when delivering and practicing strikes for the street and then practicing for MMA. One of the other factors in here that comes under the technical title and the difference between applying them and applications is range, all right? And range is also involved in the mechanics and the striking selection that you may or may not use. So again, before, like I stressed in the street, is in most situations occur where we're at point blank range in here, right? My hands are up in a confrontation position like this, okay, and I can't back up in here, I can't escape, or my hands are down here, down here like this momentarily before I get them up, or whatever. Or I could be turning sideways in here like this, and somebody jumps me from the side in here. I have to, have techniques, and depending upon the range I'm at, I have to have techniques that are going to be effective in those ranges in here. As opposed to something like Muay Thai kickboxing in here, is really designed to be out here at long range, doing something like this, or they're right here trying to hold on to you and, do stuff like this in here. So when you start blending these principles, these factors together, psychological, practicality, technical, choice of striking selection here for the street in here, you have to be able to, deliver techniques from very close ranges in here. And if you limit yourself to certain techniques just based on range only, all right, and only say, well, for example, when I'm in this close in here, you can't deliver a jab, okay? Well, you can't deliver a boxing type jab, okay, because you just don't have the leverage, in close range in here with your triceps, because in boxing jabs and stuff, they don't hit in the best position in here unless they're hitting locked out like this. So in close range in here, right, people say, well, I can't strike, in straight in here with a jab, so what I'll do is I'll switch to a Muay Thai elbow, and you certainly can, which is an effective technique. But one of the differences in the street is that makes you a good understanding of combat is you want to learn how to use the weapon as best as possible in all ranges in here. Okay, meaning that I want to be able to stand here at this closer range, and I want to be able to practice delivering a punch or a palm strike right here that resembles a jabbing technique, not just relying on range to say, well, out here, this is where my jab is, right, and this is where my cross is in here, and in this range in here, well, there are no punches. We just elbow or we grapple, right? So one of the things in MMA that they do that's not effective is that they have horrible striking in close range. Their striking kind of mindset goes out the door because they're so focused on grappling and stuff, and if they do any kind of striking from here, a lot of it's just arm punching in here. I mean, it takes them 5 strikes to, to equal 1 strike in here, as opposed to the street, right? The street, you need to be effective from close range in here immediately, right? Irregardless of what position you find yourself. So if you're standing sideways like this in here, and to take a quick action in here, you might have to, you're going to have to use some kind of a backhand. So if I'm like this, closest weapon to closest target, right, and deliver a quick technique, right, to get me into action, to get me into the next action in here, right? As opposed to MMA is not going to find themselves here like this, right? Or if I'm standing this close in here with my hands up in confrontation management in here, I certainly can deliver an elbow into the throat, okay, like this, but I also need to make sure I can practice, straight punches and circular punches, right? So if I'm in this close in here, like in the street, I might have to deliver a quick, like shoveling, uppercut into this guy's throat in here like this, okay? Or I might have to, throw a, like a finger jab in here real fast, right? And deliver, an elbow in here, something of that nature. So the range and the mechanics of your skeletal muscular structure are going to have to change based on what you're trying to apply it into. Okay, so to sum it all up, some of the mechanics that you apply in the street will work in MMA if you study them. Right? But if you're trying to take certain styles that are designed for sport and trying to modify and put it right into the street, a lot of times they don't work. Right? I have yet to see boxing strikes in here be really effective in the street when it comes to close range. They're not ready, the psychological aspect, they're not ready for just the aggression and just the rage base and stuff that can happen in here. Right? Like in MMA, there's time to move around, there's time to take a rest. My opponent may rest because he's tired. Right? There's rules and things like that. Okay? So I hope you found this video informative. If you do, please give it a like. Leave a comment below. Share it with your friends in here. And don't forget to subscribe and check out my playlist of a lot of my strategies, tactics, and techniques, tips for the week for MMA specifically. That helps me kind of understand kind of where I need to go with my channel in here. So thank you for watching and take care.